how do we as leaders show up as the best versions of ourselves and harness our energy in a way that brings out the best in others? So look at your calendar and really think about when you're at your most productive and what your day should look like. And maybe it shouldn't be 10 back-to-back Zooms. Maybe you should organize your day in a different way to really bring the best of yourself. Welcome to the final episode of Season 2 of the Seismic Shift podcast. I wanted to give you all an overview of everything that I've learned from our amazing guests throughout the entire season. The goal was to explore seismic shifts in leadership, and my big seismic shift that I had been seeing as an executive coach and as a management professor was that the old command and control, authoritarian culture of fear did not work. That it's all about connection. And so when I chose the guests to be on the podcast, they were all best-selling authors, global thought leaders, and I wanted to hear what were their seismic shifts, what were they seeing from their lenses of what was going on in leadership in workplaces and how we can best adapt, whether it's connection, disconnection, whatever it was. And so I wanted to share with you all the top 10 themes, the top 10 takeaways that I learned from season 2. So here we go. Number 1, gratitude. We had Chester Elton on the podcast, and he is the example of gratitude. He's written books on it. He gives talks on it. And here's what we learned from Chester. We're not doing a good enough job saying thank you. So I'm not talking about gratitude. I try, I'm sure you do too, wake up in the morning and really think about intentionally of what I'm grateful for in my life and focus on those positive things. I think that's a beautiful way to wake up. And let's continue that. What Chester is talking about is in workplaces, we are not saying thank you enough. We're not saying good job enough. We're not saying, I appreciate all the hard work that you put into this project. We're not saying, well done bringing your team together to achieve this goal. We're just not saying it enough. And what we found is that people are leaving because of bad bosses. People are leaving because they're not feeling appreciated. So my charge to you, my call to action is let's show appreciation more every single day and say thank you. Here's something to think about, because some people say, oh, but I don't want to be, over appreciative and say it too much because then it won't mean that much. Well, Chester was intrigued by that, I guess, pushback he had been hearing from leaders. And so they conducted a study to figure out what too much of appreciation looked like. And it's if you give thank yous and I appreciate you 12 to 15 times a day. I can't imagine that any of us are doing that. So again, what I want to encourage all of you all, including myself, we need to do a better job every day of saying thank you, I appreciate you, great job on the project. Number 2, allyship. I am so fortunate to be able to work with Morag Barrett, who is a brilliant Brit. And we're running a leadership academy here in New Orleans for Gail Benson and all the organizations that she owns, including the New Orleans Saints and the New Orleans Pelicans. And Morag is the author of a book, You, Me, We, Why We Need a Friend at Work and How to Show Up as One. And I've learned so much from her. So the big takeaway from that episode was we need to be a better friend at work. We need to be that person when people think, who should I go to who's supportive and helpful? Who can I count on? We should be that person. Why? Well, let me tell you, Morag and I were in London last November for the Top Thinkers 50 Gala, and it brought together the top 50 thinkers on the planet right now in management. And we were so fortunate to have been nominated. We didn't win, but at least we got to be at this gala and hear all these amazing speakers. And our biggest takeaway from that event was that in order to differentiate ourselves as humans, particularly when it comes to AI and all of the technological advances, is we have to be likable. We as humans now, we have to be somebody that people want to work with. We've got to be likable. We have to be collaborative and not competitive. So my biggest takeaway from my episode with Morag Barrett is to show up as a person that others want to work with, and let's all be allies at work. Number 3, inclusion. I was so honored to have 2 amazing best-selling authors, Sally Helgeson and Jennifer McCollum, on the podcast last season. Jennifer McCollum had just become CEO of Catalyst, and Catalyst is a nonprofit with the aim for the advancement of women. She is passionate about this subject. And so we talked a lot about how do you create environments where women can thrive? What do those environments look like? And so first we talked about characteristics of women. And it was really interesting because my research has shown that the female inherent qualities of being empathetic and kind and collaborative, which, probably 20 years ago weren't exactly the qualities that we were saying that you should demonstrate at work. They are very much the qualities now of what it takes to be a successful leader. So I'm encouraging whenever I get up in front of women audiences, female audiences, to say, lean in with those superpowers. And then Jennifer brought a different perspective. She said that in all of her years of working, and she catapulted to an executive to the CEO position twice. She has actually been at the New York Stock Exchange ringing the bell. She's now a best-selling author. She said she was called a cupcake with a razor blade inside. And she said, let's encourage women not just to be sweet and kind, even though right now you can actually get away with it. And we want environments that encourage that. But you can also have a razor blade and you can just get things done and you can be assertive. So we want to create environments where women can thrive. And right now, as a result of coming out of the pandemic, women now more than ever before can see themselves as executives. Why? Because there's more flexibility than ever before. If you can see it, you can believe it. If you can believe it, you can become it. And you realize that, wow, maybe I can go and pick up my kids from school, give them a snack, and then hop on a couple of Zooms and work on projects and then feed them dinner and then maybe hop on for a couple of more hours at night. There's so much flexibility now that is really allowing women to shine. And then I had Sally Helgeson, who also talked about inclusion. Her book, How Women Rise, is also a bestseller. And she had such a different perspective. She said that what it takes right now for women to rise and an inclusive environment is women need to be professional, not just authentic. So there was an interesting conversation about authenticity because so much of research right now is show up your authentic self. She said, but at the end of the day, if we're saying just to show up like, hey, this is me, this is all of me, sorry, but this is just who I am. She's like, is that really going to be the best for you and for your corporate culture? Yeah, at the end of the day, you've got to be a professional, right? You can be a professional and also show warmth and ask people how they're doing and create these kind environments. So she's really stressing professionalism. She also brought up a really good point about the power of language, that in order to be a leader, to create inclusive environments, you have to be so careful about the language you use. Because here's what we've learned. The language that you use shapes how you feel about yourself, and it shapes how others feel about themselves. It totally affects your environment, and it gives you an opportunity to be more inclusive and to use more inclusive language. So inclusion is actually the foundation of connection. Number 4, servant leadership. Servant leadership with Demario Davis. Demario Davis is the head of the defense for the New Orleans Saints, and he is such a beautiful human. He and I had a blast on his episode. He was actually in a hotel room. He had just arrived with his 5 children and his wife to play in the Pro Bowl. And I asked him about his leadership and what his seismic shifts were. And here were my takeaways from my interview with Demario Davis. He is all about servant leadership. He went through some really challenging times as a child, as a kid, in a single family home, surrounded by people who were not role models, who were in gangs and used drugs. And he ended up in jail. And he said, Michelle, that taught me everything I needed to know about his faith, about his spirituality. And it really became the foundation for moving forward and using what he said were the gifts given to him by God to help others. So he uses his athleticism, right, to be a star on the New Orleans Saints football squad. But more importantly, he sees himself as a role model for others. And so he said, it is not about him. It is truly about the we. It is about the team. And he really tries. He's the guy that you see in the cameras who's leading the chants, but with his defensive players before they go out on the field. We talked about this on the episode. He's the guy that's in the middle of the field that holds his arm up. And everybody in the stadium knows when it's a home game in the New Orleans Superdome, everyone knows when he puts his arm down that we all go into the Who Dat chant 3 times and roar. And he said he still just gets the chills when he hears it because it's a way to connect the fans with the players. And it just gives so much energy. And so he's just such a beautiful human that just wanted to stress the importance of servant leadership, helping to develop others, be a role model for others, not lead with your ego, and recognize that it's all about we. Number 5, creativity. We had Michael Gelb on the Seismic Shift podcast, and Michael Gelb has written a book about connection. He's written a book about creativity, and he has a new book out about walking. And he brought such an interesting perspective about seismic shifts. He said there's been a real seismic shift when it comes to time management. He said years ago, he was leading creativity management seminars and workshops in companies all over the world. And back then, besides creativity, it was all about how to manage our time. And he said, now the seismic shift it's about energy management. And so finally, we're giving leaders permission to say, okay, how can I show up where I bring out not only the best in others, but I make sure that I'm bringing out my best energy? How to do that? Well, you've got to manage your calendar, right? And so it's this big disruption of how in the world do we manage a calendar rather than managing time, managing our energy. So we have to ask each other our questions about ourselves. When is the time period in the day when I'm at my best, when I'm at my most creative, when I'm at my most productive? Am I a morning person? Am I a night person? And how do I work best? Do I work best can I take connection walks? Can I say, let's meet outside, or I can put my earbuds in and we can have a conversation while I'm walking, or we can go shoulder to shoulder? Or do you have to be in a conference room? If you're in a conference room, should it be super formal where people show up in their best suits delivering updates on PowerPoint? Or can it be more of an informal conversation with updates and it's more reciprocal rather than one way? How do we as leaders show up as the best versions of ourselves and harness our energy in a way that brings out the best in others? So look at your calendar and really think about when you're at your most productive and what your day should look like. And maybe it shouldn't be 10 back-to-back Zooms. Maybe you should organize your day in a different way to really bring the best of yourself. Number 6, courage, with C.B. Bowman. Boy, CB and I had such a robust conversation. I just love her. She had just published her book on courage. And we talked about how powerful it is and how important it is for us, whether you're high-level leaders, whether you're middle leaders, whether you're not even a leader, you're an individual contributor, and that's wonderful. It's still important to own your story. We talked about how for years, she and I both had held on to this concept that we had to show up perfect And we had to act like we were perfect, even though we were so imperfect. And we thought that that was the way to be successful. And ultimately, perfection equals disconnection. And so her whole mission now is to help others be more courageous by actually being imperfect, by being vulnerable, by owning your story. And she calls these things little micro courage moments. And I said, how can you be more courageous at work, CB? And she said, just do it. One step forward, lean in rather than acting from a place of fear. Just look at courage as micro courage in these little moments. Just lean in and be yourself and know that you don't have to be perfect and just show up authentically, own your story, because perfection equals disconnection. So the most courageous leaders are actually the most human. Number 7, mentoring with Scott Miller. I just love Scott Miller. Scott Miller is still with the Covey Institute, Franklin Covey, out in Salt Lake City. And he's doing so much more on his own. He has a speakers bureau. He's an agent, a literary agent, and he writes books, I think, once every 6 months. So I called him right when he had just published a book on mentoring. Since then, he's published a book on how to become I think it's a master or a messy. He has this whole messiness series. You really should check him out. He just is so engaging and authentic. And so one of the takeaways from that episode, I said, Scott, so I believe that we need to build cultures of connection to drive results. And I think mentoring is a cornerstone of that. So how do you recommend to all of our listeners out there, how do you be a great mentor? And he just gave such practical advice. He said, Michelle, just be real and be honest. So if you're showing up, right, and you're trying to mentor somebody and that person is saying, gosh, I need to do a better job connecting with my people. I said, okay, so what would you tell them? He said, I would tell them just to be honest, just to say, hey, team, I really want you to enjoy your work. I want you to be engaged at work. And so I'm really going to make an effort. I want to connect with you more. I don't think I've been doing such a good job of that in the past. I've just been so action oriented. So I'm going to try to go deeper with you all and really get to know you all on a personal basis. Sometimes it might not come across well, and let's just laugh about it. But please know that I'm trying and I want you to enjoy this and I want us to get along and really create something special here. So his advice to be a mentor is just to be real. I loved Scott Miller. Number 8, becoming coachable. I had the honor of having Scott Osman and Jacqueline Lane on the podcast, and they had just written Becoming Coachable, and it had just become a Wall Street Journal bestseller. They are the president and CEO of 100 Coaches Agency. So I happen to be a part of 100 Coaches. I work with them. I'm a part of the agency. I'm one of the coaches. And so I really get to see them in action. We meet about 3 times a year, at least in person. We have calls every other Monday. So I really wanted to know from their perspective of leading the agency that puts the top coaches around the world with the top executives, what does it mean in order to be coached? What are some of the characteristics so that you can be effectively coached, that you can go into the coaching process and really benefit from it? And you know what they said? And this is so true. You've got to be open to it. So if you think about some people that you've worked with and you've tried to give them feedback and they're super defensive and their body language goes to the defensive posture, you think, oh, this is not going to go well. In order to become coachable, you have to be extremely open and say, I want to learn. I want to grow, and it's going to be hard. I conduct 360s all the time, 360 feedback reports where I go and I interview all of the key stakeholders in a leader's work life. So about 10 to 15 people who interact with this leader from above, below, across, hence the name 360. And let me tell you, it's one of the hardest parts of the coaching cycle is looking at the report and reading about how everybody else perceives your coaching, not your coaching, your leadership. So I recognize that feedback is hard. And in order to really become coachable, you have to be open to it. Like, I want to learn and have this growth mindset. One of the other takeaways from that episode, they said, this was really interesting, is as they were building this agency, they were all about automation. They're all about efficiencies. And then they realized they had developed so much automation that they had lost the focus on the relationship with the people, with each other in the company, with the coaches that they were representing, and with the leaders that they were trying to match the right coach with. All with the, trying to be the most efficient and the most automated. So they had to go back and say, wait, what are our core values? It's all about the relationship. And that's what makes somebody a really great leader. So in order to become coachable, we need you to be open, have a growth mindset, and to be focused on relationships. Number 9, deep listening with Dr. Mark Goulston. Gosh, this was such a special show. I didn't realize when we were having the conversation and I was interviewing Dr. Goulston, Dr. Mark, for my Seismic Shift podcast, that he would die in the next couple of weeks. So this was a tough one. I knew he was going in for a bone marrow transfusion, and I knew he was battling leukemia, but he just always seemed so healthy and positive and full of life. And I tell you what, this is a special episode because he really went deep as far as what you can do as a leader to be a great listener for your people. And he gave this excellent advice. And he said, let's attract employees to your company. How do you attract employees to your company? Well, think about your people who are out having lunch or having a drink with others. And if somebody said, hey, tell me about your job. And if they say, I can't wait to go to work, I love my job, then everybody's going to say, I want to work for that company. And he said, and how do you create that environment is by just asking them questions. So go to your people and say, I want this company, I want this workplace, I want this organization to be a really great place to work where you want to come into work. So I'm going to ask all of you and do it in your one-on-ones. Don't necessarily do it in a survey. Just do it in your one-on-ones and say, tell me 3 things we should start doing, 3 positive things we should start doing that would really make a difference for you. And then 3 things we should stop doing. He said, ask everybody, figure out what you can and can't do, what's realistic, what's not. Go back to your team, let them know that you listened, you heard, and now you're going to do something about it. He said, that's how you create positive environments. People want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be listened to. They want to feel like they're making a valuable contribution. A lot of leaders are scared to ask the questions. And what Dr. Mark told us and taught us is just ask the question. Number 10, Work, Life, Bloom with Dan Pontefract. Our favorite Canadian, Dan, and I had such a fun conversation about his new book that he just published called Work Life Bloom, How to Create a Team so that it can flourish. Oh, he's just such a delightful human. I mean, he's also a, top global thought leader, top keynote speaker, top executive coach. And at the end of the day, just a beautiful soul. And so in our conversation, here's what I learned about how to create a positive work-life environment. He said that the Gallup people who do the engagement surveys, so many big companies use the Gallup survey, the engagement survey, that it has been the same for the last 30 years, that companies haven't gotten better on how to engage their employees, and employees haven't improved in their engagement. So what he's calling for is disruption, to really do things differently. He said those old days of just showing up as just, I'm a professional and I'm not going to talk about anything personal. I'm going to pretend like I'm not a husband. I'm going to pretend like I'm not a wife. I'm not a dad. I'm not a son. And all of that is personal. So I'm just not going to talk about it. And it doesn't have anything to do with who I am as a professional, that I'm just going to have this very strict boundary. And he said, that doesn't work anymore. We have got to create environments environments, right, where we can show up as our full selves and that we can allow people to actually have a life, to take breaks for lunch. As a matter of fact, I was just talking with one of my clients who's in Silicon Valley, and he was sharing with me how I think he's about 60 years old. And so he was raised in that startup Silicon Valley world. He said, Michelle, we would sleep under our desks. And it was, you had to work to live to work, live. Like, it was everything. Your whole life was work. And you put in so many hours at such a great cost to your mental health, to your physical health. It created divorces. You didn't see your children. So what Dan Pontefract is saying in his big thesis is it is time to do things differently, because creating that old environment that is more of the culture of fear and work at all costs to great detriment is just horrible for us as humans. So let's create environments where people can show up and thrive and bloom. Love it. In summary, here's what I learned from interviewing all of those best-selling authors, global thought leaders, change agents, executive coaches, keynote speakers. Kind of boils down to this. Everything has changed. So we must change. There are so many seismic shifts going on, and we have to adapt. We as leaders have to be open to all of this, have to have this growth mindset, and we got to show up differently. We have to create positive environments that are collaborative and not competitive. We have to show up as a team player, as an ally, as a servant leader. We've got to be there to support one another. We have to show up as humans and show interest in our people. We want our people to feel seen, heard, valued, respected, appreciated. We need to show gratitude more, right? We need to be flexible. We need to appreciate all aspects of a person's life and not expect them to just show up as a professional, but again, to show up as a full human. We need to give ourselves permission to be imperfect, to sometimes not have all the answers, to sometimes be vulnerable, to create cultures of connection that are safe, right? That people can take risks, because those are the most innovative cultures. Because one of the things I've really learned from interviewing all of these people about seismic shifts is that we are in an era of true, meaningful connection. People want it. People need it. And so it's up to us. So my call to action for all of you all is just let's think and reflect on how the world has changed and how we can show up as the best version of ourselves to create these positive environments, to create cultures of connection, because that is what's going to drive results. Thank you so much for tuning in this season. To all of our listeners out there and all of the guests that have been on the Seismic Shift podcast. We are actually going to be recording all of the cool interviewees and the guests we're going to have for season 3 this summer. Stay tuned. Can't wait to see you all again. Appreciate all of you, and thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.